Hi, everybody. This is Rob Packard from Medical Device Academy. Today's, and I'm out of focus. Sorry about that. There we go. Today's video is going to be about what is a Class 1 and Class 2 device exemption. Next week, we're going to talk about regulatory pathway in a blog that's related, but this one's about exempt products. So these are products that are going to be marketed in the US. They're medical devices, but they don't require some sort of regulatory clearance or approval by the FDA. We're also going to talk a little bit about other types of exemptions for medical devices, but we're going to start with the regulatory approval process. So, for those of you that aren't familiar with the difference, why I'm using the air quotes here, the FDA only approves Class 3 devices that require pre market approval. These are the highest risk devices. Class 2 devices require pre-market notification. You're notifying the FDA of your intent to market the product in the US, but you have to first demonstrate to the FDA that it's equivalent to another product that they've already cleared on the market. And that's based on one of two things. Either there was a similar device on the market back in 1976 when they implemented the Food and Drug Act, or option two, there has been a de novo submission that was granted and somebody created a brand new product classification and you're going to claim equivalence to that. If neither of those two options are out there, then you have to create a whole new product class for yourself through de novo. And then we have the Class 1 devices that are the lowest risk. Most of your Class 1 devices are exempt from the 510K process. You don't need to submit a 510K. You don't need to submit a PMA. You just register your product with the FDA. But before you can do that, you have to make sure by doing a regulatory pathway analysis that your device falls within the scope of the exemptions. And the FDA explains what that is. And I'm going to go through that a little bit next week in our blog on the regulatory pathway analysis. But the important thing I was trying to explain in this video is that if your device is exempt, you don't need to do a 510K. You don't need to do a de novo. You don't need to do a PMA. All you need to do is register with the FDA and just make sure before you do this that you fall within the scope of the exemptions. If you exceed them, then you may have to do a 510K. So we do have some Class 1 products out there that would normally be exempt that they had to submit a 510K. It's because they exceed the exemptions. Okay. So what does it mean to be exempt? You're exempt from submitting the pre-market notification. You don't have to fill out an E-Star. You don't have to submit it to the FDA. You don't have to pay the user fee for the 510K review. You don't have to wait for them to take 60 days to tell you what's wrong with it. Fix those things, submit it, and then get your letter that says you're cleared. You don't have to worry about all those things. The downside is you're also not going to get a clearance letter. You're not going to get any kind of confirmation at all, except that you're registered with the FDA as an establishment and you've listed that device. That's all you're going to have. So you're not going to have any proof that you're correct. The problem with this is there are a lot of companies that don't do the regulatory pathway analysis correctly, and they register a product and list it, or register their company and list a product as a Class 1 exempt product when it's not. And that's not legal. But the consequences are you get a letter from the FDA that says it's come to our attention. And then it goes on for there. I'm explaining how we believe this product should be 510K cleared. You haven't submitted a 510K clearance, so please give us a call and we'll discuss what to do. So if you get one of those kinds of letters, that's what it's all about. It doesn't mean you're going to jail. It means you need to fix this or inform the FDA, oh, we licensed somebody's 510K, or we do have a 510K, we just didn't you're just not aware of it. That's not usually the case. Usually it's you're not correctly registered and listed. You need to get a 510K clearance. Now, what does it take to get a device on that exempt list? Every once in a while, the FDA adds some new Class 2 devices to the exempt list. So it's not just Class 1 devices that are exempt. There are some Class 2 devices. And the way the FDA has done that is they've reviewed the risk profile for those devices, such as how many adverse events have there been reported. So these are serious injuries or deaths, or it could be something malfunctioned in the device, and if it happened again, it could result in a serious injury or death. So, how many of those have happened for your device? If there's no chance of a serious injury or death for your device, you probably are in that exempt category, or the FDA might be considering to put you in that category. But sometimes the only reason why we don't have any serious injuries or death that are reported is because it's a new device classification that was recently created, and there just isn't enough product out there for it to happen yet. And so a couple years ago, the FDA published a list of devices that were intending to put on the exempt list. And there was actually a petition that was initiated in order to change that, because the FDA was taking devices that were very similar to other devices that weren't exempt, said, oh, we're going to make this exempt just because there weren't very many devices on the market in that category. So if it's not a very not a very popular classification. There's not a lot of devices out there in that class. There's not a lot of people that need that device. It might have a very low number of adverse events reported. So you kind of have to know how many are out there and know the percentage in order to make a real risk analysis. It's not just the number of events, but it's also relative to the number of units that are out there. Sometimes the FDA changes their mind. I'll give you an example. Of the last 10, 15 years, the FDA has systematically moved class 3 devices that were 510K clearances or pre-market notifications, moved them to a class 3 designation because they felt they were too high a risk. And they said, we need to have these all be PMAs. So now all the class 3 devices that were 510Ks are now PMAs. They changed the pathway for those products because they felt they were too risky to have in a 510K process. An example of that would be AEDs, automatic electronic defibrillators, that are used in like airports to bring people back to life after they've had a heart attack. So sometimes they upclassify things. Usually they downclassify things because they start out in a conservative position. Now, if you remember at the beginning, I also talked about another type of exemption. But if this has been helpful so far, if this is what you wanted to hear, please click the like button below or share it with somebody else that you think might be having some questions about their device. Is it classified as a class 1, class 2, class 3? If they need a regulatory pathway analysis, share it with them so they can see our blog next week and watch this video. Now, for the other type of exemptions, we have GMP exempt. GMP stands for Good Manufacturing Practices. Excuse me. Good manufacturing practices is the term that they used for the drug industry. The medical device industry, it's quality system regulations, but we still call it GMP regulations. GMP regulations. But it's really quality system regulations. And it's just, are these companies making products that are so low risk they don't even need a quality system? There are some devices that are that safe where the FDA has made that decision. Excuse me, I knew I should have gotten a glass of water. So, for those devices that fall into this category, what do you have to do? Well, you still have to have certain things that you meet the requirements of, such as labeling requirements is usually one of those requirements. But there'll be other things that you're exempt from, like you don't need to have a quality system. So look and see if you're exempt from GMPs in the classification. And I'm going to show people how to do that in the regulatory classification blog next week. Another type of exemption is you're exempt from design controls. Most class 1 devices are exempt from design controls, but there are a few exceptions. They give you a list when you look up design controls. That's 21 CFR 820.30. They give you a short table saying what devices are exempt from design controls. Very short list. One of them is exam gloves. They're not exempt. So anything on the table, they're not exempt. Everything else that's class 1 would be exempt. But there is an exception. If you have automated equipment, such as software, that will not be exempt. So surgical gloves, they're not going to be exempt. There are, I think, 4 other items that are not exempt, and anything with electronic automation. That software, in the inherent complexity, the need to patch and prevent cybersecurity threats, those are the things that are going to push it into a higher classification, and the FDA wants design controls for those devices too. So you have GMP exempts, you have design control exempts, where you need your whole entire quality system except design controls. And then there's a third type of exemption that a lot of people forget about. It's humanitarian device exemptions. So in these cases, you're not exempt for design controls, you're not exempt from quality system, but you are exempt from a PMA or a 510K or a de novo. Instead, you apply for a humanitarian device exemption. And this is for products where the market is so small in the US that 8,000 people or less need that device each year. So if you can show only 8,000 people or less need that device each year, you are eligible for a humanitarian device exemption. You still have to apply, and there's a process for it, but it's definitely a streamlined process over the other types of regulatory review by the FDA. So those are the different types of exemptions. You have class 1 devices, most of them are exempt in general from 510K clearance. We also have some class 2 devices that are exempt from 510Ks. We have no class 3 devices that are exempt, and we have class 1 devices that are exempt from design controls, but not all of them. And then we also have GMP exemptions, where you have a device that's so safe they don't even require you to have quality system in place. If you have any other further questions, please put them in the comments down below. Those really improve the engagement on our videos. And if you have any suggestion for next week's video, please put it down there, and I'll consider that for next week's live YouTube streaming at 12:30 Eastern Time in the afternoon. Thank you very much, everybody. See you next week. Bye-bye.